Hi everyone, it's Heather, Business Development Lead for Cooperatives First. This webinar was recorded on October 20th, 2021, and it's on investment, funding, and financing, finding money for economic development. I hope you really enjoy this webinar. To check out any other of our upcoming webinars or to register, just go to cooperativesfirst.com/webinars.
All right, so everyone should have just got the note that this meeting is being recorded. We record the panel portion of the webinar. Obviously, we don't record the breakout sessions because we can't in all those parallel sessions. But this part of the panel, the webinar is going to be recorded, and in about a week, it'll be up on our website, cooperativesfirst.com/webinars, along with all of the other webinars that we've done. Okay, so welcome Lauren, welcome Lana to the panel. Quick introduction to our panelists. For those of you who haven't met our panelists before, Lauren Johnson is the Economic Development Officer from Shaunavon, Saskatchewan. And Lana Cowling-Mason is the General Manager of the Community Futures West Interlake in Manitoba. So I have asked both Lauren and Lana to talk to us about investment, financing, funding, because they were both, I already knew them. And I thought they would both really have something interesting to bring to this topic. Now, what's interesting about both of them, too, is that they are both key members of investment cooperatives, the first in each of their respective provinces. Now, that's not necessarily the topic of today's conversations, but I'm sure it's going to come up. Well, I just want to thank you, two, for both being the first on those, because that takes some serious guts. And you guys both have, it's pretty incredible what you're doing. Okay, so that out of the way, I also want to see if you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat. So the way we're going to do the Q&A is if we have time at the end of the panel and the question seems like something that, yeah, okay, definitely we need to answer that question right now live, we'll answer the question. Since we only have an hour, we might not be able to get to all the questions. If we don't get to your question, we will absolutely send you an email response, okay? After. I keep the chat, like a copy of the chat, and we'll send out answers afterwards from the panelists and me. So let's dive into this panel. So the first question, and I'm just reminding everyone of the order, I'm going to get Lauren to go first. Okay, first question is, how do projects in your region get funded sort of normally? What's your go-to strategy for finding funding for a project?
Oh, well, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I don't like to say I'm an expert in really anything because I'm still learning. So it's really great to have these opportunities to learn from other people in the industry because I have only been around in economic development for the past couple of years. So it's great to have these opportunities. Typically, I would say, which isn't a really exciting answer, but we always are trying to pre-plan everything. So budgeting things for the year before, if we have a project on mind, trying to figure out our budget so that we can budget it if we can fund it ourselves. That way we also have projects that are shovel ready, that are pre-planned, that are thought out. We know the vision, we know what we want to achieve from it. And then from there, honestly, the go-to for finding money for me is grants. I swear I'm always applying for grants, always writing grants. To me, the answer is apply, apply, apply. I know it's super tedious and it's a lot of work. And I know people outside of municipalities or even other people within the municipality don't understand sometimes how tedious of a process that can be and how involved it is. But in my time doing it, that's really where I've seen the funding come from. If you think you have a project that fits or even partially fits, my go-to is apply because you never know. And I've definitely gotten grants that I didn't think I was going to get, but I did. And it just is that little bit to help. And then there have been times too where if that doesn't work, we also do have to turn to, fundraising, leveraging partnerships, things like that.
Lana.
Cool. Okay. So like Lauren, again, just happy to be here today to share some of our experiences and kind of what we have learned, I guess, maybe more so, and maybe some of the things to hope that other folks don't go down the same rabbit hole that we did on a few things, but just to share what our experience has been and how it's working in our community. So the region that I represent is all very small communities. Our biggest one has a population of about 3,500 people total in the municipality. So what we're finding is a lot of our projects that we are asked to assist with and help the community groups with are those community-based initiatives driven by either social enterprise or not-for-profits in the area, because they're providing key services that at this point just don't have the economic backing to be a successful commercial entity. So they're providing critical services, but are doing it from that nonprofit standpoint at this point, and we're hoping that they'll grow into something more. So with those kinds of projects, generally there's always a local portion that needs to be realized by the community in order to leverage anything coming from the outside, whether that be external traditional financing or grant sources. What becomes our biggest challenge is with traditional financing, accessing that capital is hindered by the lack of security. So usually these nonprofits, just an example, a service club wants to do a housing project or to support a daycare development or something like that. It's usually those nonprofit groups like the Lions Club that come forward and want to do it. They don't have the equity, and they're very much viewed as somewhat of a higher risk by our traditional financiers because, you know, it's a board that's changing, all of those types of things, but they are the people that are going to move and shake this because the private sector doesn't see the economic return at this point for some of those types of services to happen. So it creates a real risk, I guess, or it adds risk to it and a real barrier for them to access that traditional financing. So it makes, for us, we spend a lot of our time making sure that the project planning is done that Lauren had mentioned. Figuring out the sustainability is even more critical in order to assure that we're making the right decisions with the limited resources that we have. So we don't underestimate the amount of time spent in that planning stage and just making sure that it's the right project, that it's a good project, and that the diligence is done, because we're now dealing with public money for the most part, and with those nonprofit pieces, which usually the governance of those groups comes back into question, and making sure it's sustainable from a management standpoint for those nonprofit groups. So again, that focus being about the right project versus right now. So what does that long-term look like? And not being afraid to ask those hard questions around it, figuring out really what that long-term viability looks like. We often find that there's money out there to build stuff. What there isn't a lot of money out there to do is to support the ongoing operation of that stuff. So that investment of that time up front is really critical in making sure that we have the right project for the community, and it's not something that becomes the next thing that we have to figure out how to manage in the long term. So that process and being shovel ready, as Lauren said, so we know what the community needs, what's important to us before that funding shows up. And the other thing that we do to get those groups ready for that is we focus on the capacity building of the actual organizations that are going to be managing these projects. So that could be board governance support, making sure that they have a solid foundation to build upon, and also capital campaign training, because a lot of our projects come back to some fundraising, and making sure that they're making the best possible use of the resources that they have available and the time that they're committing to it is really important. So I think the way we do projects right now is our hope that our groups go in eyes wide open. They know exactly what we're getting into. We know the ins and outs, and it's a measured risk. And then accessing those, the seed money based on good decisions from the municipality or from other places, and then leveraging through the banks or through the programs that are available.
Just wanted to give you a chance, Lauren, if you wanted to add anything else. I saw a lot of nodding, so
just agreeing.
That's good. I mean, that's good too.
I definitely agree with Lana in the sense that it's just so important to really have that clear vision and clear, just knowing what your project is, what exactly your outcomes you're looking for, and just having that very clear vision and goals set out before you jump headfirst into it, because you're most likely going to get a better outcome if you know the ins and outs of your project before you dive in.
I really like this point about planning and sort of community project fit, I guess. And I don't know if you'll allow me a bit of a wild card question, but is it okay if we just spend another minute? I just want to talk about that a little bit more. I mean, what kinds of thought processes go into planning what project is the right fit for the community at the right time? I mean, how do you get to that point to understanding that it's the right project? And okay, you can answer as short, because again, didn't prep for this question. But what goes into knowing what fits? I mean, is it just a deep understanding of what your community needs? Is it a goal of where you're going? Understanding where you're going?
I think you need to know where you're going. And I also harp on the importance of community engagement a lot. Like, your community has to be behind the projects you're doing too. Otherwise, why are you doing it? So I think one of those important first steps is consulting with the community, whether it's residents, businesses, people that are involved in the actual project itself. I think that part is so important too.
Absolutely, that process and making it an actual process where it's thought out. So right from the engagement piece of how you're going to involve the community and assure that you actually understand what the need is, because we got a lot of presumptions and there's a lot of things that we are emotionally attached to in our community. But finding an actual process to work through and make decisions, to take the emotion out of it and start to look at the factors for success and those types of things. And so there's the consultation piece of it, absolutely 110%, and involving them throughout the process so that the buy-in stays. It's not just a flash in the pan. But then also, the real analytical stuff that's boring and nobody hates. The numbers don't lie in a lot of cases, right? What does this look like in terms of sustaining the project that we're working on? What are the benefits? And there's certain things that will require an investment. Not everything can be measured strictly by the bottom line, but you need to know those things going in. And I find if we can put a process in place for people to work through that information and make their own decision, they make the best decision for the community because they've been in that process. So I think that's critical.
Great. Thank you so much for answering the wildcard question. Fantastic answer. So now I want to get actually into a little bit more of, maybe you call it the nitty gritty, but let's talk about some of the projects, maybe just an example or two. And my wording around here was, tell me about how you got creative with finding funding for a project. So if you want to think of a specific example or examples of something that was kind of unexpected way that you got investment in a project, or something that somebody here might say, oh, like, okay, that's interesting. That might work for me. How have you got creative? I think we had Lana going first, so go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, just from the breakout room we were in, everybody's kind of got a feel for how this usually happens in terms of community projects, right? There's always got to be that seed money. There's got to be something out there to leverage with. And we've seen some creative ways of how folks are putting that together. And I think it was a forerunner to how the investment co-op discussion happened as well. So in our communities, there's been a number of projects where bottom line is you got to have that community champion who's going to lead and who's going to step up. And so before we even got involved with a lot of things around securities and shares and cooperatives, et cetera, we had a number of projects in our region that were funded through just community debentures. So not municipal debentures, nothing formal, just folks showing up with their checkbook and saying, hey, we believe that this project's a good thing. Here's a loan. We're going to do a debenture. No terms on it. You pay it back when this thing becomes a success because we believe it's going to be a success. And, that's great. And it was all different types of people that stepped forward. And the engagement process found those people that we didn't know were out there that even had an interest in some of these things. But because the effort was put into connecting to the community and figuring out what was going on, those people came forward because it was much easier for them to understand and be a part of where we were going than to go out and do those cold calls and those fundraising letters to every business in your community, et cetera, et cetera. And so that really kind of led into the thinking of where the idea around the investment co-op came for us. So it started formally with a discussion just around some regional housing. We needed in our area, but the groups, like I said, the Lions clubs, et cetera, that wanted to do it just had no equity and had no way to leverage the funding that they needed to go to the bank and make this happen. So we thought about that and the idea of a co-op where it wasn't just those big angel investors that could be a part of a project in our community. We knew that there was people out there that had $500 here, had $1,000 here, had $2,000 there. The investment co-op essentially will be set up to sell $2,000 shares, where people can come and create an equity pool. So their $2,000 as a member of the co-op is taken in. It becomes an equity pool that those regional projects can then apply to. So let's say we had a a small 6-unit housing development that needed $1 million. The group probably had some seed money of their own, but nothing to go and lever a bank at 45%. They could come and apply for an equity investment from our pool, from our investment co-op, and then lever the rest of it through traditional financing. So it took away the barriers for what they needed. And what attracted us to this was the fact that we weren't relying on those guys with $50,000 and $100,000 checks to step up. Everybody can see that if it's something that good is going to come from their community, they may have a couple $1,000s to put towards this. And they could do something good for their community as opposed to sending it off somewhere to an investment fund. We hope that they'll get a return on this as well. But this was just a really great way. We can probably find 250 people who have $2,000. It's a lot harder to find 10 people that have $100,000, right? So the co-op model really spoke to what our community could contribute. And I think it also goes a long way in allowing those people who aren't seen as the big players in the community to be a part of it and to contribute something back to the region. And so the investment co-op stuff makes a whole lot of sense for us. And we think this is where we're going to start building this regional pot of money for regionally focused projects, housing being our first priority. So I think it's really creative. I think it brings people on board. I think it's something we can manage. And I think people have a sense of ownership and pride in giving back to their community in a meaningful way.
I guess kind of building off of what Lana said, it was very similar story here, actually. I guess one of the more creative ways to find money that we always turn to was kind of looking towards those companies or corporations within the community that might have money budgeted for community sponsorship, community outreach, things like that. Whether it be a company that actually has something planned every year that it's like a grant opportunity that they have, or some just don't and they want to invest some money into the community that they're operating in. Those were kind of places that we turn to, especially since we are such an agriculture and oil and gas based community. There were a lot of those bigger corporations that we can reach out to see if there is some type of funding to help invest in our community. And we have been able to get some investment for some more of our infrastructure things in the community that we've needed to upgrade, which has been great. But like with Lana, that kind of has led to that further conversation for us, where we're actually looking into creating a local investment cooperative as well, just to, again, try to promote that investing within the community mentality. So what we're doing here in Shaunavon is that ours would actually be to help support our local small business community. So we'd be raising the capital to give out small loans to businesses for things like renovations, expansions, startup costs, operational expenses, and just really trying to foster that idea of, investing in our own community instead of somewhere else. And I think I'm really excited for it. We're still kind of figuring out the kinks and working through it, but I think it's going to be a really great thing to get going in the community. And I think it's going to open a lot of doors as well. It's exciting and scary as we are kind of the first one happening in Saskatchewan. So thank you to Cooperatives First for helping us with that. But yeah, definitely leveraging other corporations within your community if they have funding available. And then the other thing, which I know this kind of leads into the next webinar that I found very helpful with finding money, is partnerships. Leveraging partnerships. I work very closely with the EDOs from the communities around me, Maple Creek, East End, the Lake Frontier. And we've utilized that partnership to help us get funding in the past. And we're actually working on a couple of grants right now to try to get funding, because a lot of grants out there and a lot of funding out there is really looking towards partnerships now and regional cooperation. And we're really trying to just promote working together instead of against each other to just try to not only make Shaunavon better, but the whole Southwest region of Saskatchewan. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for teasing that, because actually the next two webinars too, and the one in December, is also going to be a partnership. So we got partnerships coming up. And Lana and I have had a conversation actually about the sort of regional approach and partnerships as well. So yes. Fantastic. Okay, so the next question, and this is like a great lead in, so thank you both, is we're going to talk about like this webinar. When we originally conceived of it, I thought, okay, what I don't want to do is just like a little card swap thing where we're like, oh, this grant, that grant, that, and that's fine too. I'm sure there's a place for that. But this, I want to talk about the strategy, the mindset, the planning, the thought that goes into funding, financing, and sort of getting projects off the ground. So when it comes to that, I mean, if we peel back that layer, then we're talking about a strategy where attracting investment really starts with investing in ourselves. And you both mentioned that what you've both done is that you have done the opposite of sit back and wait for somebody to invest in you and, fix the things you need. You're reaching out to agriculture companies to, fix your infrastructure, which is like, that's very innovative, You're creating an investment pool so that local business can get invested, and you're creating an investment pool to get housing invested. I mean, you are both investing in yourselves as the first step. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Lauren, I'll let you go first. You don't get a break here. This is a quick turnaround. Why is investing in yourself so important? Like, how did you come to know that was what you had to do?
I think it's one of those things that nobody understands your community, your goals, your vision, and nobody believes in it as much as you do. So to really get that momentum going, you really just need to kickstart it somehow. So investing in yourself is the best way to do that. Because like I said, you know exactly where you are and where you want to go. And you should really know, it's going back to all the planning and stuff, the steps that you think you need to do and the goals you need to achieve to get you there. So I think that's why investing is so important, and investing in yourself is so important. It's just believing in your project and your community and your goals, and just kind of making yourself do it, because it is hard to rely on outside sources, because like we have said, like grants are a great option, but they're not always a shoo-in. So sometimes you need to make your own things happen is all. That's all I have to say.
And I think from our end, a lot of these discussions came out of frustration. So, we engaged in a regional planning process where we identified, 3 or 4 regional priorities where we filtered it to things that we actually had control over the change that we wanted to make. It was getting real frustrating to sit in rooms and listen to people talk about, when is somebody going to, somebody should. Sentences that start that somebody needs to really don't work. And we were rarely having discussions about, well, what are the things that we actually could control and what could we do? Because doing nothing is not an option for our communities. Sitting back and waiting for something that has zero risk that somebody else will solve the problem is just not an option, and we don't have the time for it. We can't afford to sit back and wait much longer. And for the communities that I deal with, in all honesty, it's about maintaining our communities. Population growth would be great, but if I can hold our population, that would be fantastic too. And that's what success is going to look like for us for a little while, is to just maintain what we've got, and how do we do that? So it really came out of that frustration is, are we going to sit here and be a victim of the change that's happening in our communities, or are we going to manage this change? And what does that look like? So, when we were sitting there going, well, why isn't the government coming to help? And why isn't there a program for this? Or why isn't there a program for that? Why should anybody invest in you if you're not prepared to invest in yourself? If you have no skin in this game, then why would anybody else risk their skin for you? So exactly what Lauren says, we need to take control of our future and make sure we're managing our future as opposed to being the victim of it. And I think the other thing is, again, that process and investing in the time that it takes to have the right decisions in front of you. Because even if that solution does show up from somewhere else, it may not be the solution to the problem you have. And so, we find a lot of groups are chasing money. We're being reactive, and especially, through COVID, I think it's a good example. There's a lot of money running around right now, a lot of money. And, we see groups that are, trying to pull something together real quick just to take advantage of that opportunity, but have not had the opportunity to go through a process and figure out, well, how are you going to manage that beyond when this check has been cashed? and you now have a thing sitting in front of you. What are you going to do with it? So again, it's investing in yourself. If you expect, you need to lead by example, and you need to show that you've got the skin in the game, and make sure that you are in command of the solution that makes sense for your community, as opposed to jumping through the hoops to meet somebody else's expectations of your community. So I don't think you can waste any time in having those discussions and putting those processes in place. It will pay off in spades, because if the project is right, the money will follow and it'll be there. So.
That is incredibly inspirational. I don't think we could have planned a better way to kind of kick this off. This is actually 12:39. I had planned to sort of have the panel portion done by 12:40. So I think I'm just going to leave it there, because
as a transportation planner, my vision is
some things are happening here. It's a vision. I have a vision too, that we all invest in ourselves. I really think taking our destiny into our own hands. I mean, this is for anywhere from personal to professional to economic development. Ultimately, that's the message that I needed to hear today. So with that in mind, I want to thank the panelists for being on this panel and talking to us about how they think about investment, financing, funding, how they think about planning, how they conceive of planning, investing in themselves. And if this tipped off something that you're thinking oh, I really need to follow up on this. Okay, so for example, Lana, when you were talking, you were okay, start those, do that process of inspiring people to take their own action. It's well, how do I do that? How do I initiate that conversation? I mean, if there's more that wants to come out of here, I invite you to get in touch with me, to get in touch with the panelists, if they're okay with that. Yes, they're nodding. Okay. To ask, how do I do that? How do I get my community to realize that this is what we need to do? How do I inspire other people? How do I lead by example? Because both of these two have done that. And that's why they're here today. So big thank you. Round of applause for our panelists, Lauren and Lana. Fantastic. Okay.